सभी मान्यवर उपस्थितों का मेरा नमस्कार। आज कुछ हिंदी अवार्ड्स देने वाले हैं तो सोचा हिंदी में कुछ दो शब्द बोलूं। It's good to be on this happy occasion. Your director told me it's a colorful occasion. The first thing I thought was to wear a red kurta. So I've been coming here and I have many old friends. Lakhira Sahab is here, Kulkarni Sahab is here, many other people. So it's nice to be on a joyful occasion, almost like a birthday party. There are balloons outside on the road. So nice to be here and thank you, sir, for inviting me. I'm going to speak for about half an hour. If I exceed that, please tell me. And since it's a Foundation Day lecture, I thought I should have a presentation. And this is almost like a story. You need not worry much about the script. It will unfold in front of you. So the topic is geomagnetism and meteorology, history and outlook. So Foundation Day is something like a birthday. As I said, it's a time to ask questions. And the questions are of course not new. These are very age-old questions which mankind has been asking itself since a long, long time. So the first question is, where have I come from? The second question is, who am I? And the third question is, where am I likely to go? It's the same questions which an institution can ask itself. Where have we come from? What are we today? And where should we be going? So Foundation Day is something which inspires you to introspect and to think ahead, also to look behind, where are we? There is one common answer to both the questions. Where have I come from? Where have we come from? The answer is Alibag. So it's a very simple answer. We are not talking in terms of humanity. It's a very closed audience. We're talking about ourselves. So where have I come from? Where have all of us come from? The answer is we have come from Alibag. There's a movie called Kehraiyan recently released on Prime Video. I don't know how many of you have seen. I like to watch movies, and this particular one, Deepika Padukone and Ananya Pandey, huge cast. And I watched the picture simply because it was supposed to be shot in Alibag. And I saw the movie and I was looking for Alibag somewhere, and it just wasn't there. So Alibag actually is known for three things. So if you want to spot Alibag in a movie, look for these three things if they're there. That's what makes a movie authentic. One is the beach. It's a lovely beach. You can go on walking along the beach for miles. The other is the Kulaba Fort, which was dated back to something like 1660 or something like that, 1680. It was the naval headquarters of the Maratha Empire. Kanoji Angre, people like him. So that is something which must make a part of the Alibag scenario. And the third is the observatory. Your trip to Alibag is never complete without a visit to the observatory. So these three things are the landmarks of Alibag to begin with. And observatories have had a lot of history, in India particularly, because the India Met Department was founded in 1875, 150 years almost back. But observatories existed long before that. So before the India Met Department formally established itself as a government department, observatories were there. And they were there for many reasons. First was the British East India Company. See, there were people coming from England, young boys, soldiers, officers, collectors and all that thing. And they found the weather very difficult to live in. So they put up observatories for observing the weather. Then there were Maharajas, who were very kind of intellectuals, and they wanted to see the stars and the planets and moons and so on. And so they had astronomical observatories, they had weather observatories. Then there were organizations like the Survey of India, ports, railways, And there were only some things like, there were some amateurs who just wanted to look at the sky. So we have records of observatories dating far before IMD was actually established. This is a picture of the observatory in Chennai. It's still there. It's an astronomical observatory set up in 1792. The instruments are not there, but the pillars are still there. If you go to Chennai, you can have a look. Then there were observatories for timekeeping. There were observatories for geomagnetism. There were meteorological observatories, and there were only rain gauges in some places, just measuring rain. So like the Chennai rain gauge dates back to 1796, so almost 200 years of a record. So this was the history of observatories in our country. And the earliest geomagnetic observatories came before Alibaba. So Madras had his observatory in 1822 to 1881. Then there was Simla, which was functioning for a short while. Trivandrum was functioning since 1841. And of course, Colaba from 1841, you know that very well. So Colaba essentially began as an astronomical observatory, 1826. And by 1841, Colaba was India's timekeeper. So in those days, we didn't have anything like a timekeeping service. So Colaba Observatory was the timekeeper to the nation. And later on, when All India Radio came, Colaba Observatory used to send pip messages, 6 pips, 8:45 in the morning, 8:45 at night, and the entire nation would set its watches by the Colaba Observatory pips. Much later, National Physical Laboratory got atomic clocks, and they took over those things. So this was the history of the timekeeping thing, and timekeeping was needed by the ports, because ships will come from all over the world and would set their clocks as per Colaba's time. Then Colaba became a geomagnetic observatory, not by any plan, but by destiny. Because the observatory was supposed to be in Aden. See, the British Empire was a huge empire, and they had ports like Singapore, Hong Kong, all over the world, and Aden was one of the biggest ports in the eastern side. So they wanted to put an geomagnetic observatory in Aden. The British were fond of observatories. I don't know why they wanted to have a geomagnetic station in Eden, but they wanted to have. And the instruments were on the ship. Somehow the site was not ready, so the ship was kind of sending instruments to Colaba. And the entire set of instruments landed not in Eden, but in Colaba. And actually, nobody knew what to do with them. So they found out a professor in Elphinstone College, Bombay, to see what can be done with these geomagnetic instruments. So he was one professor, Arlebag, professor of astronomy. So he was an astronomy professor, and he was told to take charge of the geomagnetic instruments, and he did. There was another person named George Buist. He was a geographer, and he was the secretary of the Bombay Geographical Society. The society still exists. So between these two people, they took care of the geomagnetic instruments until they found a senior person, Charles Chambers. Charles Chambers was neither an astronomer nor a geographer. He was a telegraph master. You know, nowadays we have postmasters. In the olden days, we had telegraph masters. So he was a telegraph master who was in charge of the tuck thing going on. He was told to take care of geomagnetism. So that was Chambers. And he died in 1896 when they found the first Indian director, Nanaboy Adesh Framji Bose, whose photograph was in the director's office. So he was found out of all Indian people to head this. He became the director. 1899, IMD finally took over the Colaba Observatory. It was not IMD's. So it belonged to the Bombay government. The Bombay government, Bombay was a presidency. And the presidency went right from Mysore, Karnataka to Sindh, which is now in Pakistan. That was the whole layout of the Bombay government. So it did all these things on its own. So finally, IMD took over. And then it became a truly multidisciplinary observatory. Geomagnetic, meteorological, astronomical, timekeeping. Then came a problem. The moment IMD enters something, there's a problem. So the, so the problem came next year. And Bombay had trams. I don't know if you have seen trams. Trams run on rails, like a railway, but the rails are in the middle of the street. And horses used to pull these trams. And it went on for years. And finally in 1999, people thought that we should have some development of the city and we should get electric trams. So for electric tram, they had to put wires overhead all over the city. And these trams would draw power from the traction overhead. Now there was IMD which raised an objection. This is what about a geomagnetic observatory? They'll be ruined. If you have electric wires all over the city, these instruments will have no use at all. So everything was kept on hold until the Colaba Observatory decided where to shift it. And they found a place which was Alibag, little south of Colaba. And they built an observatory at Alibag, took parallel observations for 2 years to prove that things are fine. And only by 1907, trams were allowed to ply in Mumbai. I myself traveled in those trams. They were very nice, spacious, luxurious, and you could sit in Colaba and get down at Siam. And in between there was Dadar. There were two Dadars in those days. There was a Dadar TT and a Dadar BB. I don't know how many of you remember that. TT was a tram terminus, BB was the BB&CI railway. So what you call Central and Western was first called Dadar TT and Dadar BB. So these were the trams which were finally allowed. So this was the building that they built. And the reason was that they had line of sight between Colaba and Alibag. They did parallel observations for 2 years. And the deal was that Alibag will not get electricity. That was the deal. I mean, you kept the whole town in darkness because your instruments were sensitive to electricity. So Alibag was told you won't get electricity. Of course, nobody asked them. This is a quotation mark, Colaba and Alibag. It's a kind of a relationship, an old relationship. How did the name come? There's a little bit of history to it that after the First World War, the British government was broke. It had no money. And then the axe fell on IMD's budget. What was the budget in 1923? 6,20,000. For the whole department, for the whole country, from Quetta to Rangoon, it was stretching, and the budget for the whole department, including people, everything, was 6,20,000. So the result was that people had to be retrenched and activities had to be curtailed. So Colaba and Alibag were brought together into one establishment to save money, and they had one head. After the Second World War, the reverse happened. IMD was in demand for aviation, for Royal Air Force, and everything. So they increased the budget. It was increased to something like 21 lakhs and afterwards to 65 lakhs. The result was massive recruitment. A lot of people joined. A lot of expansion of services, and finally what they did was they organized IMD into regions, Bombay region, Nagpur region, and so on. And Bombay got the regional meteorological center, which is still there. That had a regional director. And they again had so many directors, so they made a separate director for Colaba and Alibag. So this is the result of an over surplus budget that happened. So this was the history of Colaba and Alibag. And the first Indian director was Dr. Moose. Moose was basically a student of the Pune Engineering College, COEP. That time it was called, I think, the Physics Institute. And then he went to Edinburgh and came back with a degree from there. And he was chosen to be the director of this. And he lived from 1859 to 1936, far ahead of his times. The next person to remember was Professor K.R. Ramanathan. He was the ozone man. See, now we all know about ozone hole. When he was there, nobody knew what ozone was. Nobody had heard of ozone. But he started making measurements of ozone in the 1920s. So these people lived long and they lived much beyond their lives. He lived for 90 years. So he started ozone observation, and it was just a corollary that he founded the Physical Research Laboratory he was the founder. The third name we should never forget is Professor Pisharati. He was director of Kolaba and Alibag for 3 years. Then he became director of the Institute of Tropical Meteorology. I joined under him. And he again went to work with Vikram Sarabhai after his retirement and came to be known as the father of remote sensing in India. So these are the luminaries that were involved in geomagnetism at the beginning of the last century. I'm now going to tell something entirely different. This is a picture from a family album, my family album. And the man standing there is my grandfather, Hari Govind Kelkar. The lady in the center is my grandmother, Padmanayana Kelkar. And the baby is my father, Ratnakarari Kelkar. So this was taken in 1901, when the baby has just been born in a family. And then comes an observatory next door. So my father grew up in the environment of the observatory. This is how it happened. And in 1910, my father was something like 9 years old, and he used to tell me that a comet would come every year to Alibag. That was Halley's comet. Halley's comet came once in 76 years, and the dark city used to be illuminated, floodlit with a comet. So this was a 1910 scenario that on a dark night you had a comet, and Halley, in fact, was an astronomer. He was also a meteorologist. Halley predicted that the comet will come after 76 years. He also explained the mystery of the monsoon. So he went to the Royal Society and made a presentation on how the monsoon works. This was in 1696 that a person sitting in London explains the Indian monsoon. So these are great people. So Halley's comet was there, and it came every day for months together, this comet. And there was another contrasting situation, which my father used to tell, that there was this dark place where scientists worked at night, in darkness, and seeing something about geomagnetism. So this was the scenario in 1910, which my father actually saw, and he used to explain to me how Alibag was. Okay, this is my own alma mater, Ferguson College in Pune. I passed BSc from here in 1962, and then well, the first thing the boy does is to seek a job. So my father took me to the employment exchange, I remember that, and told that person that Maja Mulala observatory mein naukri lawa. I still remember that. And of course I filled the form. So my father was again fascinated by the Pune observatory, this is Simla office, and he thought that his son should get a job there. Now the man in the employment exchange said, "Oh, tumhi kiti tala sanga tani ghetle pahije na tala." So this is what he said, but they didn't take, so they didn't give me a job. But later on I studied for my MSc and got an MSc from the Pune University. And it was not the employment exchange, but the UPSC which gave me a job in IMD. So my first job in IMD was in the ITM, as Professor said, Institute of Tropical Meteorology, which was a part of IMD. It was not autonomous. So I started working here. It was a non-gazetted post. And then in 71, as this became autonomous, I joined IMD's mainstream. So a long story after that, and finally in 1998, I became a member of the governing council of IIG, ex officio kind of a thing. So I visited IIT many times, and I visited Alibag Observatory as an official. So I'm sure my father was happy at that time. Okay, 1971, it's like a proud parent and his children have grown up and making their own sansars, kind of a thing. So IMD became the proud father of 3 children, IIG, IIA, and IITM. So this was a kind of a growing up scenario. So the parent is proud and the children are happy. So this is a kind of compartmentalization or departmentalization of convenience. You can build a ready ministry, matters little. But we make always a mess of things. Like some examples are there. IMD now is under the earth sciences. IMD is atmosphere, it goes to earth sciences. NIO is oceanography, is under CSIR. Ocean technology is under Earth Sciences. NGRI is under CSIR. Geological is under Ministry of Mines, of all things. Indian Institute of Astrophysics is under DST. National Physical Laboratory under CSIR. Physical Research Laboratory, Department of Space. Plasma Research Institute under Atomic Energy Department. And of course, last but not the least, IIG under DST. These are all, man-made compartments. Nature is not compartmentalized. So it's a question of convenience. If it's fine for you, otherwise you change the ministry, everything. So really speaking, there are spheres of influence. Gurbaran sir was just now telling about so many things, they're all coupled. So we call them spheres, and there's something like, I think 12 spheres. Atmosphere is air, hydrosphere is water, lithosphere is rocks, and so on and so forth. And finally, we have the magnetosphere. So all spheres are everywhere. They overlap. That's what the picture shows. They overlap. You just can't draw a line that this sphere ends here and that sphere begins there. They all overlap. All that we do is to pick and choose a certain dominating factor which marks a sphere. But they are all interlinked, interconnected. And there's nothing like an exclusive sphere in nature. Nature doesn't like discontinuities. It's one continuous continuum. So it is, in fact, Earth, air, space, continuum. In fact, this is taken from your website, what director just now read out. They're all overlapping things. I mean, you can read these claims: lithosphere, atmosphere, ionosphere, magnetosphere system. Well, what is it? It's nothing but the whole world put together. So, in fact, it's like that we have everything continuously changing and merging into each other. So, gone are the days when we became so specialized. In fact, not gone, in many places we are specializing more and more. Like a doctor who is a specialist in your right ear doesn't know what the left ear looks like. So it is something we are specializing so much that we don't know anything. But this is actually nature, that everything is combined together. So coming to outlook, we've seen enough of history. What do we do now onwards? I've put 4 bullets here. You can add many of them. First is building relationships across boundaries. Boundaries could be natural, they could be political, they could be administrative, but I think we should build relationships across boundaries. We should be learning from history. Many people don't like to read history. In fact, they want to rewrite history as per their own convenience. I don't know why did you clap anyway. So people do feel that history should be written as I look at it. No, history has been written by somebody else. We can just look at it, that's all. We can't change history by rewriting. So we should learn from history what has happened. Third thing is we should have faith in, if we are scientists, we should have faith in ourselves. Fourth is you have to repay the public debt. So these 4 things I think I'm leaving in front of you for your consideration for till your next foundation day next year. Enough food for thought for a year. But I'm going to have one slide on each of these and then I will stop. See, building relationships is extremely necessary because the problems that society faces are interdisciplinary. I'll give a list of 4 or 5. Like sunspot cycles. For the last 100 years, people have been trying to explain the monsoon in terms of sunspot cycles. The sunspot cycle is an 11-year cycle. The monsoon does not have an 11-year cycle. But still people are trying to find out if sunspot cycles have anything to do with the monsoon or with drought. So many relationships have come, positive, negative. So this is one such problem. Atmospheric electricity. Thunderstorm is a meteorological problem. You can always say, tomorrow there will be a thunderstorm. But thunderstorm is an atmospheric electricity problem. Totally connected. Solar storms, like we had one yesterday, and we are supposed to have a problem with the internet. So satellite communications are entirely governed by solar storms. Ocean waves like tsunamis, there's the seismology, there's oceanography, there's everything in it. People talk of heat wave these days. Mumbai is sweltering, Pune is burning, that kind of headlines we are seeing. But that has an effect on human health. So if human health is to be studied, we need doctors to study a meteorological problem. Heat wave is a scientific problem. Human health is a medical problem. So all of these things, it's all entirely multidisciplinary, more and more. But the goals are common, and the aspirations should also be common. So what I would like to say is that it's time to introspect whether we can share resources, not only the goals but the resources, like networks of observatories. IMD has a network all over the country, and you may be struggling to set up an observatory somewhere. Ask IMD if they can give you space. I'm sure you can. So there's a need for resource sharing and network sharing. Learning from history. I'll again go back to Alibag. I mean, look at those people who built an observatory in Alibag, and the material came from Porbandar sandstone. And every piece of rock was tested for any residual magnetism. I mean, you can imagine the tenacity of people to get into every stone. I mean, nowadays we give a contractor to make a building, but the scientists themselves were on the site to check out whether the stones were magnetic or not. So the tenacity of people is something that we should learn. Second is to have faith in science. I mean, the scientists should be confident enough to tell the government of Bombay that you can't have trams in this city. I don't think anybody here now can have that kind of a feeling that to stop that particular thing, because I'm saying this. You'd like some politician to say it for you and then go behind him. So these days, scientists should know that this is what is required to be done, and they should confidently say. But for that, they need faith in themselves. So this is something that you need. The courage of conviction is what all of us need. And this is my last slide. I'm titling Repaying the Public Debt. So if you see the scientists of old, some of them had really struggled for the sake of science. Some of them died as beggars, some were jailed, some were hanged, some were excommunicated by the Pope for their wrong heretical views, and some of them were just forgotten. But they never asked the public for money. Nowadays, for everything, we need the government for money. You want to set up a project, the first thing you write a project proposal, so many crores. Without that, you can't do science. So you should be able to do something on your own. So everything comes from the public now. And then when the public asks you asks a question, you say, sorry, we can't explain this in your language. You won't understand what I'm doing. I think that's very wrong. You should be able to tell your public what you're doing, what they want in return, and give them that. So scientists keep receiving awards, different from the olden times. They were ridiculed. Now we are getting awards and honors, so we have to give back something to the public as fast as we can. This is my last slide. I'm ending on a positive note because Alibag did get electricity. It was in 1950. Now you can imagine that a town which is deprived of electricity in 1901 is given back its basic facility in 1950 because your instruments did not permit it. I think this is very wrong. You can't deprive the public of something because your instruments are a failure. No, you should change your instruments as fast as you can. So this is something that is a lesson that I'm giving you for all of us, that when we do something against public interest, we are responsible for it. So I'm ending it on this note, and happy Foundation Day to all of you. Thank you. Go down now.